This might actually be one of the hardest tournaments that we've ever had to like predict what's going to happen, because I feel like all eight of these teams are really good. So it's going to be really difficult. It's going to be based a lot on who plays well on the day. I think a lot of these games are going to be. So I do have a top four. I don't think it's. I'm not particularly confident. Maybe three of them I'm confident in. I don't really know what's going to happen with the last one through. So I think G2, I think EDG, and I think DRX are probably going to be the ones that make it through. Although I am prepared to be wrong on those. Like I could easily see Sentinels Team Vitality going through or something, or Sentinels Team Liquid going through or something like that. I think my fourth pick is Sentinels, but I don't know. I think that I think T1 is probably the weakest team, or Trace. I think T1 or Trace are like the two weakest teams. Team Liquid for me, I do have a bit of concerns with their international level. Like I'm not sure exactly if they're going to be as good internationally as they have been in EU or in EMEA, sorry. And I think Team Vitality, they have good players that have shown good international success before, but I don't know if they're going to work yet. If they have got their like if they're in high gear at this point in the year. I think because they're a newly made team, I think especially with all these big names and these really really good players, sometimes it can actually be harder for them to be meshing and working at the start of the year, and then eventually they'll work things out towards the end of the year. And I think Team Vitality is one of those teams that I think, even though they're good now, I think they're going to be one of the teams that really switch it on when it comes to champs. So I'm not sure if they will actually make it here. Although I would be, basically for the most part, I'm pretty non-surprised if Team Vitality or Team Liquid get through instead of any of the four teams. Maybe I'm a bit surprised if G2 doesn't go through. I'm a bit surprised if EDG doesn't go through. But yeah, I think for the most part, this is what I'm going to go with for my top four. For these games as well, I think G2 will beat Trace. I think EDG will beat Team Liquid. I think Team Vitality will beat T1. And I think that this is probably the hardest game to call. But I think it might go DRX's way for now. But I can see Sentinels. I think this is the closest game, so I can see Sentinels winning it too. Okay, so I just did like a briefing with like the first games and that kind of stuff. But this is going to be like a full tier list for like the whole tournament. So I think that for me, Vitality and Trace are probably going to be 7th, 8th. With Vitality 7th, Trace 8th. And the reason for that is because, well, I think Trace is probably going to be one of the weaker teams at the tournament, but I also could see that being T1. I think T1 or Trace, I think the two weakest teams. Maybe the two EMEA teams, Vitality and Team Liquid, they also could be towards the bottom of the table. I mean, Team Liquid will be top 5th, 6th when I get there. So I do think like that's going to be like the bottom four teams. Vitality, the reason Vitality is on 7th is because for me, I think they're a team. First of all, they've not retained a core since last year. I mean, you can maybe argue like Safe and Trex, because they've been playing with each other since like Guild. But I think for the most part, they're like a newly made team almost. And I think that especially with Safe taking on the IGL role, as far as I know, it's the first year he's doing it. It might be that they, like a lot of teams, are aiming to peak when it gets to the end of the year towards champs. So they're not really going to be looking to peak now. And as a new team, it's going to be harder to peak now, honestly, as well. So I think that Vitality are probably going to be just trying to learn a lot more from this tournament than anything else, and try and get in like top shape for champs when it rolls around eventually. And I think that's how they're going to treat all the tournaments leading up to champs, until they get there, and then they're going to try and pop off every single game, and try and peak in champs. So next for me is Team Liquid, and T1. So I think T1, as I said already, right? Team Liquid, T1, like these two teams could swap, right? It could literally be like this, like easily for me, to be honest. But I think Team Liquid, I think they have less experience internationally than Team Vitality players, as far as I'm aware. But I think for the most part, I think Team Liquid, obviously they showed that they were a decent team against Vitality in the EMEA, and I think that they might show that here for now, just because Vitality, as I've already said, then probably not looking to peak in this tournament. And I think Team Liquid are a bit more hungry. I think they might have some more hungry type players that are going to look to try and get this win and put their all into this tournament, rather than seeing it as peaking in champs, in my opinion at least. Maybe not. I mean, obviously, like I feel like Nats is going to be one of those players that wants to peak in champs, but maybe some of the players not so much in that team. T1, I think for me are one of the weaker teams. I think they are pretty good though, and I can see them. Like I said as well, there are some teams. I think if Vitality are particularly looking strong and they decide to like really step it up this tournament, they could be third, fourth. They definitely have the caliber of players for that. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think T1 as well, they also have the caliber of players to be third, fourth and qualify. But I don't know if they're actually going to do that. I think that these 4 teams are more likely to qualify than these teams. Okay, so next DRX and Sentinels. And I think Sentinels for me is a bit more of a creative team. I think both DRX and Sentinels actually, both the creative teams in my opinion are here in terms of team composition. I think both of these teams are immensely creative with what they do, in some maps especially. Some things for me is like DRX. For DRX, it might be a difference in like region sometimes because, for instance, like in APAC, I think that there's quite a big pro and like KO on bind is probably one of the ones. For at least T1 and DRX, they like KO on bind, which isn't like normal if you look through the whole of the regions. I think that could be like a more APAC type stuff, but DRX specifically as well. I think there's things with like Vice as well. I think it's Vice Fracture. Yeah, so it's Vice Fracture. I think like both these teams are really creative with what they want to do. And I think both teams have really, really good individual players that can like win duels, especially DRX. DRX are one of those teams that I think that no matter who you're fighting, you're going to have a tough time beating them in a straight up duel. And yeah, that's what I think about the top 3, 4. Okay, so for the final 2, I think that G2 will end up being the champion here, with EDG being top 2 or second, because I think that G2 are in really good form right now. I think they are looking really, really, really good. And on top of that as well, I think that EDG, having just won champs, is also very, very... This is more superstitious than anything. I don't really believe in it anyway. Is that EDG, they've just won the last tournament. So, it doesn't really happen very often that Valorant teams win multiple times in a row. So I can imagine like EDG not doing it here, especially because as well, the break in between the 2 tournaments wasn't just like a regular season like regular season Masters or whatever. It was off season. So I can imagine that EDG aren't going to be as strong or like as close to the form they had in champs. I also think as well, EDG were really on form in champs. Like that's also kind of a segue to the same thing, where I think the reason why they won and they look good winning as well is that they were just hard snowballing with a lot of momentum throughout the tournament. And I think that obviously they don't have that here, right? I mean, obviously they just won their regular season, but they don't have it internationally yet. And I think that if they start to lose early on in the tournament, like if they lose the first game or lose the second game, whatever, it might just hit them like a brick wall, and they might not reach as far as what you would expect. And I think G2 is a bit more resilient as a team that way. But we'll see. I mean, this is just my choice, like my opinions and predictions. They could be completely wrong, and maybe they are. So it is what it is. I can definitely see this being very, very different. So I'd love to know what you guys think. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next one.